Author Gary Keller says, success is about doing the right thing, not about doing everything right. He continues, the trick to success is to choose the right habit and bring just enough discipline to establish it. Welcome to Everyday A New Thought. I'm Thor Chalgren. I'm taking a second look at the book by Gary Keller with Jay Papazan called The One Thing. This is the Wall Street Journal #1 bestseller. And in this book, Gary Keller has 6 points he makes in the first half of the book. He calls them the 6 lies between you and success. In episode number 121 of my show, I talked about one of the 6 lies that Keller cites, which is the lie that willpower is always on will call. And then in episode number 122, I talked about his idea that everything matters equally. And yesterday in episode 125, I talked about the lie that multitasking makes us more effective. I'll link to all of those episodes in the description below. Today, I'm talking about Keller's assertion that successful people are disciplined people who lead disciplined lives. You can imagine this kind of person. We probably all have a vivid picture in our mind of the disciplined person who has everything scheduled out. They're full of good habits. They do everything perfectly. If you looked at their calendar, everything would be scheduled down to the nth degree. They have time to work out. They have time for great relationships. They do everything perfectly because they are a disciplined person. We all have that picture in mind, right? We have that fantasy that that's what life is like. And what the point that Gary Keller is making here is that is a fantasy, that there is no such thing as the perfectly disciplined person. What he's actually saying here is that you want to focus not on being a disciplined purpose, but being someone who lives a disciplined life. And by that, he means focusing on habits. Instead of focusing on, I have to do everything with discipline, focus on good habits. The real key here is that Keller says that if you aim discipline at the right habit, it gives you actually freedom and license to be less disciplined in other areas. Basically, you're focusing your power on the habits that make the most difference for you. And that's one of the key principles in his book, is that you focus on the one things that such by doing it, everything else becomes either easier or irrelevant. So he's saying basically, pick the one habit, one at a time, that will make the most difference in your life. So the big idea is focus not on discipline, but on habits. And he gives an example of someone who we probably all know and admire and think, well, he must have lived a disciplined life. And that's Olympic swimmer Michael Phelps. And he talks about in the book how Michael Phelps, as we all probably have heard, is the most decorated Olympian in any sport of all time. And we know that he had an incredibly disciplined approach to swimming. So we might think, oh, he was disciplined in every area of his life. In fact, one of the keys to Michael Phelps's success was that he early on made it a habit to swim every day. Every single day, 365 days a year, no matter what. And so even on Sundays, that meant that he was putting in more work than anyone else. If the other people that he was swimming against didn't swim on Sundays, that meant that Michael Phelps got one more training day than his competition. So the key for Michael Phelps was not necessarily that he had to be disciplined in so many other areas of his life, but simply that he made the decision early on to swim every day. Now, one of the keys to this is that once you start to build habits, in the beginning it takes a little bit of work, but soon you get to a place where they take less energy and it's easier to continue them. So in this chapter, Keller's big ideas are, number one, don't think about being a disciplined person. Rather, you want to be a person who has good habits, and you use your focused discipline to develop those habits. The second big idea, focus on one habit at a time. He says, and I think we've all had this feeling, that no one has the power to install or develop a whole bunch of habits at one time. If you've thought about your life maybe in the month of January in any given year, you know what it's like where you thought, I'm going to develop all sorts of habits at once. Keller's saying, no, you have the ability to focus on one at a time. So pick one and make that the focus that you put all of your energy into. And the third big idea is give them time. Keller cites research that says that on average, 66 days is about how long it takes to develop a habit. And by develop, meaning where it starts off as it's hard work, but by 66 days, it's now automatic. And it's just something you do without needing to put energy into continuing it. You'll still do it, but 66 days on average is about when it becomes installed. And then at that point, you can either decide to build on it and continue with that particular habit, or maybe you'll build a new one. Now, if you think about this, 66 days, if you do that, you're probably going to be able to develop, maybe 5 significant habits in a year. Imagine what that does for your life if you take 5 habits a year and build that every single year. So the takeaway for me is that I want to look at the habits in my life and ask, what's one habit that if I deployed it might make everything else easier or unnecessary? For me, that might be something like daily meditation, where it's a habit that would benefit me the most right now. So I might decide to focus on that for the next 66 days until it becomes something that's automatic. What about you? Is there one habit that if you thought about your big picture, what's the most important thing to you? What's one habit that if you installed that now and it became automatic within 66 days, would benefit you and would support you in trying to reach what's the most important goal to you? That's the show for today. If you like this episode, please hit like if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening to the podcast, please subscribe or follow the show on your favorite podcast app. Until tomorrow, thanks for watching.